I never imagined that a single night, filled with fear and pain, would change my life forever. When, for the first time, I went through sleep paralysis, my body was completely frozen, unable to move, but my mind was desperate. I cried out to all the Hindu gods I knew, pleading for help, but nothing happened. Until, in a moment of desperation, I said something I never thought I would say, Allah Akbar. It was at that moment that something incredible happened. My physical freedom was restored, and an indescribable peace filled my being. What surprised me most wasn't the instant relief, but what that moment meant for my spiritual journey. I will never forget this, how a simple cry changed everything in my life and led me to seek a path I never imagined I would follow. My name is Ramesh Patel. I am 22 years old, and I am from a small town in northern India. I was raised in a Hindu family, where religious traditions were a central pillar of our life. From a young age, I was taught to worship the gods in our home and participate in all the rituals and festivities. However, I always felt that something was missing, a deep peace that I could not find in the traditions that were passed down to me. Before I continue with my testimony, I want to know, where are you watching from? Write in the comments, because I want to know how far my story is reaching. I hope that by sharing my journey of transformation, you might also find something that resonates with your own spiritual path. My childhood was marked by devotion to the Hindu religion. At home, the altars were always present, with statues of different gods and goddesses, each representing an important part of our daily life. My father, a man very dedicated to the faith, helped build temples and organized religious ceremonies. Everything around us was deeply tied to worship. I remember how, when we were children, my mother would take us every day to offer our prayers before the idols. It was a routine we never questioned. What I most remembered were the religious festivals, when the entire community would gather for grand celebrations with lots of food, music, and dance. Despite being immersed in all of this, something deeply bothered me. I never felt a true connection with the gods we worshipped. The prayers were just part of the routine, and the rituals, though visibly powerful, didn't fill the emptiness inside me. I would constantly ask myself, where is the peace that everyone says faith brings? I couldn't find the answers, only a constant search for something more. Back then, religion was more a matter of tradition than deep understanding. I knew there was something beyond, but I couldn't figure out what it was. As I grew older, religious festivals became the center of my life. The big Hindu celebrations were times of pure excitement, illuminated streets, altars decorated with flowers and fruits, and an atmosphere of union between family and friends. The charm of the festivals was in every detail, the rhythms of the dances, the energy of the music, and of course the food. Those celebrations were undoubtedly the biggest attraction of my childhood. I would immerse myself in those moments, participating in the dances, savoring the delicacies prepared with so much love, and absorbing the positive energy in the air. For me, it was a way to celebrate life, more than any deep spiritual connection with the divine. However, as time went on, I started to notice something strange. No matter how grand the festivals were, something was still missing. I would watch others around me, feeling an infectious joy, as if each one had found true peace, a real connection with spirituality. But no matter how hard I tried to immerse myself, there was always a sense of emptiness that couldn't be filled just by the celebrations. It was as if the festivals were a mask, a temporary distraction from something much deeper that I couldn't reach. The traditions, the prayers before the altars, the offerings, everything felt superficial, a cycle that repeated without giving me a true sense of purpose or understanding. What bothered me the most was the sense that all of it was just a formality. I participated in the rituals and celebrations, but I felt there was no genuine connection with what those practices were truly supposed to represent. The festivals, though exciting, didn't touch my heart the way they should have. I longed for more, yearned for something beyond the lights and the food, something that could bring the peace that everyone seemed to find, but I never did. The answers I sought in the traditions never came. And then I began to wonder, was this really the way to find the meaning and peace I was searching for? As I entered my teenage years, I began to experience a shift in my worldview. While Hinduism remained the foundation of my upbringing, I was introduced to Christianity through my school. It wasn't something I sought out, it simply appeared in my life. My school was a Christian institution, and there I was exposed to the teachings of Jesus Christ, the stories from the Bible, and the peaceful atmosphere of church services. The Christian teachings, unlike the rituals I had known, seemed simpler and more direct. The idea of loving your neighbor, forgiving those who wronged you, and the notion of salvation through faith intrigued me deeply. At first, I joined in with the Christian rituals at school, the prayers, the masses, the kneeling during church services. There was something peaceful about the environment, and the sense of community was inviting. I started praying along with the others, though it never truly felt like I was connecting with the faith in the same way my Christian friends did. For a while, I was torn between the two worlds, the Hindu traditions I had known all my life and the newfound faith that was beginning to feel strangely comforting. But there was one moment that left a lasting impression. It was during a Sunday service, as the congregation sang hymns of praise, that I found myself lost in the words. I couldn't fully understand what was happening, but I felt something inside me stir. Maybe this was it, I thought. Maybe this is the peace I had been searching for. I even began to call out to Jesus in my prayers, asking for guidance, for a sense of belonging. But despite all the good feelings, there was still something missing. I was still searching for the peace that no tradition seemed to fully offer. The truth was, as much as I admired the simplicity of Christianity, it didn't quite bring me the fulfillment I was looking for. I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that there was a deeper connection out there, something more authentic that had yet to be revealed. This feeling of incompleteness led me to an unexpected path, one that would challenge all my preconceived notions and open my eyes to the true meaning of peace and faith. But I never could have predicted how I would find it. Despite my growing curiosity about Christianity, I was still deeply influenced by the prejudice I had been raised with, especially when it came to Islam. Growing up in India, the media portrayal of Muslims was often negative and skewed. I had been taught to view Islam through a lens of fear and misunderstanding. I associated Muslims with violence, extremism, and terrorism, a view that was perpetuated by films, news outlets, and even casual conversations in my community. The images of men with beards wearing traditional Muslim attire were often depicted as dangerous figures, and I subconsciously carried this fear with me. I remember feeling uneasy whenever I encountered someone who looked distinctly Muslim, whether it was someone at school or in the streets. It was strange because I had never really interacted with Muslims personally, yet I had these deep-seated fears. I couldn't separate the religion from the stereotypes that had been ingrained in me. The idea of Islam seemed so foreign, so far removed from everything I knew and practiced. There was a growing internal conflict. How could a religion I had been taught to fear hold any truth? Could it be the same religion that was so demonized by the media and even by my own peers? What made this worse was that I had no real understanding of Islam. I had never read the Quran, never looked into its teachings or history. My knowledge of Islam was based purely on assumptions, fueled by media narratives that distorted the true essence of the faith. It wasn't until later, much later, that I realized how misinformed I had been. But at the time, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of discomfort whenever I saw someone practicing Islam. I wanted to distance myself from it, to stay in my comfort zone of what I knew, Hinduism and Christianity. Little did I know that the same religion I feared would be the one to bring me the peace I had been searching for all along. But that realization was still far off. At that moment, Islam was the last thing I ever considered exploring. The journey to discover the truth was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would break down the walls of prejudice and open my heart to a faith I had once feared. It wasn't until I entered college that I had my first real encounter with Islam. A few of my classmates were Muslim, and one day they invited me to attend a gathering at the mosque. At first I hesitated, driven by the deeply ingrained fear and prejudice I had always carried. But out of curiosity, I decided to go. My mind was full of conflicting thoughts. I had always been taught to stay away from anything associated with Islam, yet here I was, about to walk into a mosque, a place I had only ever heard negative things about. As I entered the mosque, the first thing that struck me was the serenity that filled the space. The architecture was simple but beautiful, and the atmosphere was calm. I sat among the worshippers, and I could feel the presence of something greater in the room. The men and women around me were absorbed in their prayers, moving in perfect unison, their devotion evident in every movement. There was a sense of peace in the air that I couldn't quite explain, but despite all the beauty and tranquility around me, I felt out of place. I didn't understand the prayers being said, nor did I know the customs and rituals. I felt like an outsider, uncomfortable and unsure of what I was witnessing. The deep connection the worshippers had with their faith was palpable, but I still couldn't shake off the discomfort of being in a place so unfamiliar. My preconceived notions about Islam held me back from fully embracing the experience. I left the mosque that day with mixed feelings. On one hand, I was intrigued by the peace I felt there, but on the other, I still felt a sense of confusion. This was not what I had been led to believe about Islam. I had expected something foreign, something violent, but instead I encountered people who were humble, peaceful, and dedicated to their faith. I left that day questioning everything I thought I knew. Islam wasn't the enemy I had imagined. It was something much deeper, much more profound than I had ever given it credit for. But I wasn't ready to let go of my fear just yet. That moment was just the beginning of a much longer journey, one that would require me to confront my own prejudices and misconceptions head-on. One night in November 2017, I had an experience that would completely change the course of my life. It started like any other night. I went to bed after a long day, feeling physically exhausted from my regular workouts. But as I lay there, ready to drift into sleep, something terrifying happened. My body completely froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, and I could barely breathe. My mind was racing in panic, but my body refused to respond. It was as though I was trapped in my own body, unable to escape the overwhelming sense of dread that consumed me. This was my first encounter with sleep paralysis, and it was the most terrifying experience I had ever had. I felt as if something was pressing down on me, suffocating me, and I couldn't even scream for help. It wasn't just the physical sensation that terrified me, but the deep sense of helplessness and fear that engulfed me. I had heard about sleep paralysis before, but I never thought it would happen to me. As I lay there, paralyzed, I started calling out in desperation to every god I had ever known. I called to the Hindu gods, I called to Jesus, I called to anything that could help me, but nothing came. No relief, no answer, just darkness and fear. In my panic, I began to call out to all the deities I had ever worshipped, hoping that one would intervene. I cried out to the Hindu gods, hoping for salvation. I repeated the names of saints, thinking that anyone could hear me and bring me peace, but there was nothing. The terror continued to mount, and then, in a moment of pure desperation, with every ounce of my being pleading for relief, I did something I never thought I would do. I said, Allah Akbar, and in that instant, everything changed. The pressure on my chest lifted, and my body was free. I could move again. A sense of profound peace washed over me, and the fear I had been living with for what seemed like an eternity was suddenly gone. I didn't know why I had said the words Allah Akbar or what they meant, but I knew in that moment that something had shifted. I was no longer afraid. In fact, I felt a deep, comforting peace that I had never experienced before. It was as though something greater had heard my cry and answered in the most unexpected way. This experience left me confused and stunned. How had I been saved by a name I had previously feared? And why had it worked when nothing else did? This moment would lead me to a search for answers, a journey that would challenge everything I had ever believed about faith, fear, and spirituality. Little did I know this was the beginning of a profound transformation in my life, one that would bring me closer to the truth I had been searching for. The moment I was freed from the paralysis, a wave of peace swept over me that was unlike anything I had ever felt. For the first time, in the middle of my fear and desperation, I experienced calm, not just in my body, but deep in my soul. I didn't know why saying Allah Akbar had made a difference. I had never even considered exploring Islam before. Yet, in that moment, that phrase brought me the most profound sense of relief. The experience was so inexplicable, so out of the blue, that it completely shook my previous understanding of faith. How could something I had always feared be the key to my freedom? How could a faith I had distanced myself from bring me the peace I had been searching for all my life? The next morning, I woke up in a daze trying to process what had happened. I had always thought that the gods I had been taught to worship would be the ones to save me, but none of them had responded. Yet when I invoked Allah, something shifted. Something deep inside me told me I had just touched the surface of a truth that had eluded me for years. I was compelled to learn more. I had to know what had happened, and why that moment of calling out to Allah had resulted in such profound peace. I began searching. I read about Islam, the Quran, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the deep connection to God that Islam emphasizes. As I delved deeper, I felt my heart opening in a way it never had before. I realized how much I had misunderstood, not just about Islam, but about religion in general. I had always been looking for peace in places where it wasn't, in rituals, in superficial beliefs, in material possessions, but the peace I had experienced that night had come from something far deeper, something beyond the rituals and the superficial. It came from surrendering to the truth and calling upon the one who has power over all. As I continued reading, I felt the pull of something much greater. It wasn't just the relief from the sleep paralysis that I sought anymore. It was a genuine hunger for understanding, for connection, for peace. The more I learned, the more I realized that I had been searching for this peace all along, and it had been right there in front of me. Islam wasn't the enemy I had once feared. It was the path I was destined to follow. And with each page I turned, each prayer I read, I felt my heart moving closer to Islam, as if the door I had once shut so tightly was now slowly opening, revealing a truth I had long denied. As I continued my journey of exploration into Islam, I found myself grappling with many questions, doubts, and uncertainties. I had been raised in a Hindu household, immersed in its teachings and traditions. The rituals, the prayers, the idols, it was all I had known. But now something was changing within me. I couldn't ignore the peace I had felt that night. I couldn't deny the profound sense of relief I had experienced when I called upon Allah's name. This feeling lingered in the back of my mind, urging me to delve deeper, to understand more. The more I read, the more I realized how much I had misunderstood about faith, about God, and about spirituality. I began to ask myself, what is the true meaning of peace? Why had I been so empty, even after following every tradition and ritual that my family had instilled in me? I had spent my whole life looking for fulfillment in material things, in the festivals, in the rituals. Yet none of it had ever truly satisfied me. My heart was still searching, still yearning for something that felt real, something that could offer me lasting peace. The teachings of Islam seemed to offer that peace. It was a peace that didn't rely on external rituals or possessions, but on a deep connection with the Creator. The more I learned, the more I realized that Islam was not about fear or judgment, as I had once thought. It was about mercy, about the relationship between a person and their Creator. Islam taught that God is always there, ready to guide and protect those who turn to Him in sincerity. It was a faith rooted in submission to the will of God, but it wasn't a submission driven by fear. It was driven by love, trust, and understanding. This realization was profound. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace that was not fleeting, not temporary. It was a deep, abiding sense of peace that filled the emptiness I had carried for so long. But the journey wasn't easy. There were still parts of me that resisted. The preconceived notions about Islam, the fear that had been instilled in me, were not easily shaken. I had to confront those fears head-on and challenge everything I had been taught. It was not just about learning the teachings of Islam, but about unlearning the misconceptions I had carried for so long. I began to realize that in order to truly find peace, I had to let go of my pride and embrace the truth no matter how uncomfortable it might feel. This internal battle raged on for some time, but the more I reflected, the more certain I became. The peace I had been seeking was not going to be found in anything I had known before. It was going to be found in a life of submission to the one true God, in a life devoted to the teachings of Islam. As I continued to study, I felt my heart soften, and the conviction to follow the path of Islam grew stronger. The doubts and fears slowly began to fade, replaced by a sense of certainty and peace that I had never felt before. I was ready for the next step in my journey. After months of searching, reading, and reflecting, I reached a point where I could no longer ignore the pull in my heart. The peace I had felt that night during the sleep paralysis, the moment I called upon Allah's name, had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning. The more I studied, the more I felt an undeniable connection to the teachings of Islam. It wasn't just about the words in the Quran or the practices in the Hadith. It was about the profound transformation they promised, a transformation that resonated deeply with my soul. I recall the day I finally made the decision to embrace Islam. It wasn't a moment of sudden epiphany, but rather the culmination of a long journey. I was sitting alone, reflecting on everything I had learned. I thought about the fear, the confusion, and the prejudice I had carried for so long. And then I thought about the peace I felt when I called out to Allah. I realized that the peace I had been searching for all my life wasn't going to come from anything external. It wasn't going to come from material success, from the praise of others, or from following traditions that never truly resonated with me. It could only come from a deep, sincere connection with the Creator. I remember the first time I said the Shahada, the declaration of faith, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is His messenger. As I said those words, a weight lifted from my chest. It wasn't just a formality or a ritual, it felt like a release, a true act of surrender. For the first time I felt that I had found what I had been searching for all along. The emptiness that had plagued me for years began to fill with a sense of purpose and belonging. I knew that my life would never be the same again. My conversion to Islam was not about rejecting my past or my family. It was about embracing a new path that spoke to the deepest parts of my soul. It was about recognizing the truth of Islam, that peace comes not from the things we accumulate or the rituals we perform, but from a sincere submission to Allah, from living a life based on the guidance of the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The journey was not easy, and there were moments of doubt and resistance, but every step I took brought me closer to the peace I had been searching for. Islam provided me with answers that I had longed for, answers that no other religion or belief system had been able to give me. It was a peace that was not temporary but eternal, a peace that filled every corner of my being and transformed my heart. In embracing Islam, I found my true purpose, my true peace, and my true connection to the Creator. As I reflect on my journey, I realize that every step, every moment of confusion, every doubt, and every fear led me to where I am today. The peace that I had been searching for all my life was not found in the idols I once worshipped, nor in the material things that I had accumulated. It was found in the submission to the one true God, in the embrace of Islam. A faith that initially terrified me became the source of the most profound peace and fulfillment I've ever known. If you, like me, have ever felt lost, disconnected, or empty, I want you to know that peace is possible. It doesn't matter where you come from or what you've believed in the past. Allah's mercy and guidance are available to all who seek it with a sincere heart. My journey has shown me that no matter how far we stray, no matter how much we fear the unknown, there is always a path back to peace, a path that Islam offers through the worship of Allah and the following of the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I share my story not because it is unique, but because I believe that many of us are searching for the same things: peace, purpose, and fulfillment. If my journey resonates with you, I encourage you to seek the truth for yourself. Read the Quran, speak to those who are on this path, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Let go of the fears that hold you back, and open your heart to the possibilities that lie ahead. If this testimony touched your heart, please share it with others. There are many people out there who may be struggling with the same questions, doubts, and fears I once had. Your support, your willingness to share this story, can help guide someone else to the peace that Islam offers. Share this video in your groups on your social media, and let others know that transformation is possible. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the conversation. Let's keep spreading the light of truth and peace. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel for more stories of transformation and faith. May Allah guide us all on this beautiful journey.